afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our OCOP Forum on seizing opportunities against the challenges of international trade. We would like to acknowledge the presence of Senator Aquilino Martin Pimentel. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, sir. I would also like to acknowledge a former DTI official, former Bureau of International Trade Relations Director and later Assistant Secretary, Ramon Vicente Cabitin. Earlier, we had discussions on trade policies in the light of rising global protectionism, very informative and insightful presentations and thought-provoking questions. We now proceed to session 3 on navigating new horizons, forging ahead through strategic economic partnerships. Before I turn the floor over to Mr. Ed Pedrosa, I would like to inform our participants that our conference officers will be circulating evaluation forms. Please fill them up. It is a way for DTI to be able to improve how we conduct our OCOP sessions. So that will be collected at the end of our forum this afternoon. So with that, Mr. Ed Pedrosa, please.
Well, thank you very much, Assistant Secretary. I hope you all enjoyed your lunch. I certainly did. I didn't have enough of a break though between this morning's sessions and this session. My head is still really spinning. Session 3 is about navigating new horizons, forging ahead through strategic economic partnerships. Earlier today, I had told you the story of how I'd spent much of the past few months in conferences discussing these issues. Two things I think always come out. One is the continued importance of the multilateral trading system, and the second is the need to build strategic relationships. But I've also mentioned that while it's true that the global trade system, global trade is slowing, as you saw from Yusek Peri's slides, some countries are bucking the trend. But in spite of global trade, they are still attracting investment and moving up into global value chains. For example, as you saw, while Vietnam, the incoming ASEAN chair, is along with the Philippines and all ASEAN members, a member of ASEAN, that we're going to hear a lot about, but it's also a member of the CPTPP, it's concluded FTA negotiations with the EU, it's also concluded negotiations with the Eurasian Economic Union. I don't know, do any of you know what the Eurasian Economic Union is? Okay, some of you do. Korea and Chile, to mention just a few. Singapore, where I live, has a wide network of dozens of FTAs. It's now working on a digital economy partnership agreement with Chile and New Zealand to set forward-looking standards for the fastest growing sectors of the modern economy. So to take us through these complex issues, we have 3 highly experienced speakers and again 2 discussants. So I'd like to just invite the 3 speakers to immediately come up onto the stage. Our first speaker is Attorney Alan Hepty, Assistant Secretary for the Industry Development and Trade Policy Group. Attorney Hepty has, well, a wide range of trade policy experience. I don't know quite how to summarize everything. He's had a lot of experience in intellectual property work. He's published a book, as he showed me earlier, on intellectual property. He's worked with the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He's a practicing lawyer and so on. So, Alan, please join us on the stage. And then I'd like to call on Mr. Sammy Tan, Executive Vice President of Wentai Holdings. In addition to his role with Wentai Holdings, he's the chair of the Confederation of Wearables Exporters of the Philippines. He holds numerous positions as well in the textiles industries of Hong Kong, and he's equally active in the public services, serving on boards of universities and hospitals, I think in Hong Kong. Am I right? please, Sunny Tan. And Ms. Kelly Myman Hub, she is a former director for Mercus Holder Southern Cone in the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, and she's now managing partner for McLarty and Associates. So I'd like to call on Alan, the Assistant Secretary.
Magandang hapon sa inyo lahat. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm the first speaker after lunch break. So I hope I will trigger your interest just the same. I will forego with the usual salutation. I'll just go straight to my topic. First, the topic assigned to me is actually ASEAN State the Course on Regional Economic Integration, Free Trade Agreements, and of course the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. But I took the liberty of simplifying this aim to just saying staying the course on regional economic integration. In the course of my presentation, bear with me, but I will give you some historical context of Philippine trade relations, as well as some data that would help us in a way understand the current trade performance of the country. And after that, I will be discussing mainly the present trade negotiations being conducted by the country for purposes of enhancing our strategic partnership with our major trading partners. So, I'd like to begin with one interesting, not to say controversial, excerpt from the book Culture and History by Nick O'Keefe about the Philippines. According to him, it is interesting to note that before the Spaniards came in the Philippines, the country was not Asianized in the first place. The archipelago was there all along for centuries, but the degree of influence of the Asian culture was not at the same level as other neighboring countries such as Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia. Compared to other countries, our religion, art, alphabets, food, and technology before the Spaniards came did not have much semblance as that of our neighbors. Maybe if you think about the lack of ancient temples in the country or artworks akin to the Malay race in Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, or Vietnam, one may agree to his observation. So in other words, what he is saying is that the archipelago was ignored by its neighbors. If it were not for the Western interest, invasion, and intervention, the Philippine archipelago would have ended up like any underdeveloped Pacific islands in the ocean. So in other words, before the Spaniards came, the Philippines has been a marketplace. The Arabs, the Chinese would just come here to trade their crafts or products. But if you will peruse, there was no transition in terms of technology because basically we did not get to learn how to make porcelain for that matter, or maybe even the kind of artworks that Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and of course the Chinese have. We're very near these countries, but never did they occupy us. So in other words, Philippines at that time was just a barter place, okay, where trade happens. And it was during the occupation of the Spaniards that the Manila-Acapulco trade was, of course, opened. And it is said that's not the advent of globalization. Now, when you take a look at this historical context, we can say then that the Philippine economy basically was built through trade and economic integration. Vibrant labor market because of our people, strong consumer demand because we have that propensity to buy products, goods from other countries. And of course, our resilience to create and innovate. Now, being a trading nation, let's take a look at our trade performance in 2018. So basically, we are in deficit. But if you will look at it, our major trading partners are actually the United States, Japan, and Europe. But also, we trade with other countries Asia. And you will notice that most of our deficits are contributed by Asian countries. Foremost is of course China, followed by Japan, US, Korea, among others. So basically this is the context. Now, if you will analyze our trade deficit, if you will reckon it from 2014 at $6 billion, in 2018 it has phenomenally increased to almost $47 billion. So that has been the trend. In a short period of time, there was this huge amount of deficit that accumulated in our trade relation. But of course, it doesn't mean that because we are in deficit, that means it's bad. So we have to rationalize things, we have to look at it carefully, and of course, analyze the basis of this deficit. We gathered some data, and you will see that the percentage share of trade deficit by end use, if you will have to categorize the same, based on this classification, that is intermediate goods, consumption goods, capital, and the other which are not expressly specified. You will note that almost 57% are intermediate goods. And when you say intermediate goods, basically these are goods that can be used for further production or manufacturing. The consumption goods being imported basically are only at 17%. And you have the capital importation of 6.4%. So basically, by straight analysis, you can say that most of our imported products, being imported is of course, you can safely assume that are being used for further production or manufacturing processes. Now, these are the top countries contributing to the trade deficit. So I mentioned this already: China, Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, Taiwan. And let's have a brief rundown of how this trade performance evolved and how this trade deficit developed in the country. Let's start with our figures in the 1960s. You will know that 1960s basically this is after the war. So the country was the restructuring period, rehabilitation period. And after the war, our products basically are agricultural product and forest products. That's why our top exports during the said period would cover oilseeds, nuts, kernels, sugar, metal scraps, animal, fruits, among others. So those are the top exports in the country. And of course, with respect to the top import products of the country, you will note machineries, base metal, transport equipment, electrical machinery. These are all products necessary for development, industrialization. And that is expected because of the situation at the time. That was in the 1960s. Fast forward, in the 1990s, our top exports would already cover articles of apparel, clothing, electronics and components, wood, craft furniture, ignition wiring, cathodes, other products, and of course steel bananas and their other agri products. But the message is that signifies that the Philippine economy had already transcended to a higher level, and that we are already into a manufacturing stage. But still, our top import products would cover those capital equipment and other intermediate goods necessary for production. But take note that before the 1990s, there were several events that transpired in the 80s and the 70s. Yesterday, I mentioned about the trade war between the United States and Japan. In the 80s, there was this trade war between Japan, and as a result of that, the United States garnered a tremendous amount of trade deficit because of the products being exported by Japan and the kinds of electronics. And of course, you can recall the Walkman, the cassette tape, and of course the gas-efficient Toyota, Mitsubishi, and Nissan. And compounded by the oil crisis at the time, that's the primary reason why there was the surplus. And of course, as a countermeasure, the United States imposed high tariffs on these products. So basically, to address this, they had this Plaza Accord that resulted to the depreciation of the US dollar. And eventually, the Japanese were forced to shift their production and manufacturing facilities in other countries in Southeast Asia. And during the 80s, the countries that I would say benefited from the trade diversion were of course Thailand, because the automotive industry would say, improved or was transferred there by the Japanese companies. Indonesia also, automotive industry. But for the Philippines, we are the recipient of the electronics industry, which today we have maintained. But during that period, the Philippines has been encountering a lot of challenges, both economically and politically. We can recall, of course, the series of coup d'etat, and of course, a lot of challenges. I don't have to mention anymore. Now, in 2008, our products have significantly improved. So we have already machineries, we exported, vehicles we exported, and of course, optical products. So, in other words, this only shows the transition that our manufacturing industry has achieved, if you will record it from the 1960s. But just the same, our imported products remains to be anchored more on capital and intermediate goods. So, I prepared a slide here, some sort of a performance trade, Philippine performance timeline from 1960s to 2018. And you will note that before the 60s and immediately after the said era, you will note that almost the trade performance are break even. And then after we enter into several free trade agreements, then the deficit ballooned. Our total trade also significantly increased. Well, we can attribute that, of course, to the free trade agreements that we entered into, but at the same time, we can also attribute the same to the economic development that the country has experienced. Now, you will ask why other countries are more progressive than the Philippines. But again, the answer to that is that let's go back again to the historical context. Let's take a look to the political and economic structure of countries like Vietnam, China, Singapore, how they were programmed to trade and conduct business. I think that's very important because if you can zero in only the analysis on the economic aspect, then of course almost all these policies are the same. But there's another level that you have to factor in international trade. That's a political aspect. Because in international trade or trade relation, we don't talk only about goods. We cover a lot of things. We actually cover the whole gamut of running the government or running the country. So it covers services, it covers investment, it covers rules, basically everything. Now, as a result of the economic integration, what happened is that the Philippine economy has gravitated in the region. So all our transactions, dealings, were concentrated in not only in ASEAN, but of course in Asia Pacific. And of course the result is now reflected in this slide, so I will not enumerate the figures here in Southeast Asia. The economic integration, basically, were tariff-free in ASEAN. In the case of Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei, we have eliminated almost 99.3% of all the tariffs, and of course 97.7% for CLMP, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. But if I will go back to the slides that I have presented earlier, take note that in the 60s, most of our exports are going to US, Canada, and Europe. Fast forward to the 1990s, then what's left in the north is the United States, and then of course we still have Europe. And then 2008, it all gravitated now in the Asia Pacific region. So basically, what's left on the other side is the United States as one major trading partner. So I think that is also significant because if you will analyze, most of our exports actually are going to these countries, the United States, Europe, and Japan. And incidentally, we only have one bilateral with our major trading partners, that is with Japan. We have yet to, of course, negotiate our FTA with the US and, of course, the European Union. So, can you attribute now the number of FTAs that the country entered into with its trading partners for purposes of whether or not it is destined to develop economically? If we can peruse the number of FTAs entered into by our Southeast Asian neighbors, you will note that maybe offhand, you can have simple analysis that there is a direct relationship with respect to economic progress the more FTAs you have, the more developed you are, if that will be your conclusion based on numbers of FTA. But of course, that's not the case. But just to say, what is important in FTA is that, as I mentioned, is that you are not just negotiating again market access for your goods. You have to cover a lot of everything. And the transition of the various FTAs that the country entered into shifted to a lot of areas. So we have the regional FTAs right now, the FTAs with Japan, and of course the EFTA countries. And now we are negotiating into a bigger free trade region, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Now, what is RCEP? This is, of course, ASEAN-centric, ASEAN-led, contrary to the common notion that this is led by China. It's considered as modern, comprehensive, high-quality, mutually beneficial. Modern because the terms and conditions, the provisions being negotiated are being aligned to the current development, not only in international trade, but also in technological development. It is comprehensive because it doesn't cover only market access of goods. It covers services, investment, and of course, emerging areas such as government procurement, intellectual property, e-commerce, among others. And of course, high quality because of the inclusion of these new topics, and mutually beneficial. Mutually beneficial is a very important element of the RCEP because in the negotiation and in the crafting, concluding of the terms and conditions, you have to take into account the levels of economic development of the parties. You have to take into account the levels of development of the least developed countries, I mean their progression as far as the fields of e-commerce, for example, or intellectual property is concerned, compared to China, India, Japan, Korea, among others. So this is a snapshot of the subjects being negotiated, okay, in RCEP. So it consists of 20 chapters. Right? So it almost, as I mentioned earlier, it almost covers everything. Okay? So figure of RCEP. Now, what are our agenda and priorities in this negotiation? Well, of course, number one is enhanced market access, not only for goods, again, but also services and investment. Second, industrialization policy that we are currently implementing. We have to consider the welfare of our local industries. We have to take into account also access to and transfer of technology, because this is one offensive interest that any developing country should push in any negotiation. Because in an FTA, one aspect that you can take advantage of are the knowledge, technologies that you can avail of from developed countries. We want to generate investment, of course, employment opportunities, and socio-cultural economic development. Now, what's our relations with respect to these RCEP participating countries? Again, for all these 15 countries, we're in deficit. And this is the snapshot of the trade that we have been doing with these countries. So if you will further analyze the same, almost all countries were in deficit except for Japan. For the period 2014 to 2018, we're in surplus. Maybe because we have the PIGEPA, which contributed, of course, to the generation of investments here of Japanese companies here in the country. So with RCEP, we expect a stable and predictable legal and policy regime. Why stable and predictable legal and policy regime? Because a company who would like to invest in the Philippines would have to factor in what kind of business environment will that administration or country implement in the next few years. And of course, from the investment standpoint, there has to be some degree or higher degree of predictability. That's why the crafting of laws, rules and regulations must be attuned to the best practices being implemented by developed countries. That's why when you enter into an FTA, there are instances wherein one country will have to be forced to amend its laws, rules, and regulations. Unless, of course, you're already advanced or you're ahead of the others. Second, of course, enhanced market access. We have to optimize the export of our products here in the Philippines, not just agricultural products, but also industrial goods. We want to create an environment where it will provide a wider accumulation in value chains so that we can take advantage of the preferential arrangement, and of course, to provide an avenue for our trading partners, which are not part of the agreement, to access bigger markets. So what's the status now of RCEP? Well, you heard from the news, two aspects of the negotiation. One aspect of which is text-based. It has been concluded. It's now being legally scrubbed. But the second aspect, market access, is still being negotiated. So in other words, negotiation is still ongoing. As to the composition, you heard the news that the participation of India is a big question mark. As to the reason why, there was a pronouncement of the Prime Minister that India opted to be out of the RCEP agreement for several reasons. And of course, many countries are trying to convince India to stay. Japan is number one. But there are so many analyses, okay, that you can read, of course, in the news on why India is not that eager, or I would say has decided that to join RCEP. Okay. So basically, in these negotiations, there are a lot of considerations also that we have to take into account. From a Philippine perspective, our challenges here is of course how to contend with our constitutional limitations. Second is that we have to maintain certain degree of flexibility when it comes to passing policies, and also we have to align and unify the positions of various sectors in the country, and we have to prioritize, okay, the industries that we have to protect. Now, there is this perception, and of course, I would say notion, that one challenge for the Philippines in entering into free trade agreements is our constitution, because there are many constitutional provisions that they say very protectionist or protective of our local industries. Some of the state policies that I have included in my slides is of course the fact that in pursuing our trade policy, we have to take into account the general welfare of course the country, and you have to utilize all forms and arrangement. But the same should be done on the basis of equality and reciprocity. And also, the preferential use of Filipino labor, domestic materials, and locally produced goods, and adopt measures that will help them be competitive. Now, I would like to share the decision of the Supreme Court in Tanyada versus Okara, because these constitutional provisions have been put to test when we acceded to the World Trade Organization. And we know for a fact that among the fundamental principles of the World Trade Organization are number one, national treatment, most favored nation, and transparency. On national treatment, basically, it tells us that if you will give favor to a Filipino, then that favor, privilege, must also be given to all other nationals. And of course, under the most favored nations principle, if you give a favor or privilege to a certain national or country for that matter, then that the same privilege must also be given to all. So basically, it's the principle of equality. But how the Supreme Court navigated all through this constitutional provision, it pronounced that while the Constitution provides that indeed we give bias to Filipinos, the fact remains that we also operate in an atmosphere of equality and reciprocity in dealing with our trading partners. In fact, according to the Supreme Court, the Constitution allows an exchange on the basis of equality and reciprocity, frowning only on foreign competition that is unfair. Moreover, the Supreme Court also made mention that our Philippine companies are ready to compete internationally, and that whenever we enter into an FTA or international agreement, indeed we can waive certain aspect of sovereignty without violating the Constitution, based on the rationale that under the Constitution also, we adopt the generally accepted principles of international law. So in other words, while we find and pursue that stability in our relations with our trading partners, we have to maintain also the degree of flexibility. So it's a question of balance. That's why when you enter into a negotiation, you have to factor in all those legal aspects also. But at the end of the day, what we want is that to create and have the economic region wherein there is an open, free, fair, and balanced economic environment. Maraming salamat.
Thank you very much, Alan, for that overview of Philippine trade policy. I want to now call on Sunny Tan, who's going to talk to us on the trends in the global trade environment, what it looks like for business and where the opportunities are abroad. Sunny.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you still getting energy after lunch. My name is Sunny Tan. I'm the Executive Vice President of Lintai. I wear different hats to give a background so you understand where I'm coming from as I make the presentation. I'm the chairman of the for the Confederation of the Wearable Exporters of the Philippines, CONWEB. I'm also deputy chairman of the Federation of Hong Kong Industries. We in our company, we operate factories in 7 countries, and including China and most of the Asian countries. So I hope I'm able to bring my point of view as an industry representative, as well as a business person, how we look at Philippines and why we're here, and how we look at the other countries and how we see the competition and what we can learn from it. All right? So, to start, I want to share with you what's really happening as a business owner as we work with our brands. By the way, Lintai is making bags and apparels, so we're dealing with the American brands like Coach, like Ralph Lauren, Michael Kors. Since after China joining WTO, China has been growing, and Lintai, in fact, Lintai moved from the Philippines into China for production. And we enjoy very abundant labor. But nowadays, things change to the other side. So everybody's so busy moving out. It didn't happen just now, but it happened for the past few years already, as you all know. Of course, the second one is really the China and the US trade war that we hear almost every day, and I will explain a little bit more later. And the third one is really the competition among the Asians. Just for information, I would say sometime this year I went with the Department of Foreign Affairs of China to Myanmar. I was in Thailand with the Hong Kong government last week with BOI and Eastern Economic Corridor. And now I'm here with DTI in the Philippines, so you can see how active all the countries are in terms of getting all the shares from the exiting of production from China. When you look at this chart, what you can see is China is no longer cheap. You can see that if we are making production in the Southeast Asia, not only the tariff, sometimes with or without tariff, China is expensive. A worker has to make, I would say, close to $600 or more per month to survive. And also, RMB has been appreciated for the past few years, as you can see from the last little bit on the right. So it's not easy to really operate in China. But then more importantly, even though if you have money, if you have the margin, why are people having problem in China? It's really the workers. I'm not sure if some of you might have been to China 20, 30 years ago. When you go into China, you start up a factory, you have workers lining up, 100 people lining up just to get an application they want to come and work for you. And they are coming from out of the province, they come in just on one mission, they want to get a job, they want to make a living and bring back the money. That's what they did. They don't mind overtime, they work hard, they work fast. And now what happened? One-child policy happened for a long time. Only one kid, some of them they did come to southern China, eastern China, but then the economic situation really grew and improved. The parents they slowly move back to their hometown and they start to enjoy their life as the economic development improve in their own home province and countries. So what did they do? They say, "Kid, why don't I pay you a little bit more? You just stay around my home." Okay, then they go to the closest big city in their country, in their province. So what's going to happen? The place like Dongguan, Guangdong that you have heard of, we're running out of factory workers. They don't come. And they don't want to work in a factory where maybe no aircon. Okay? They don't want to do the finger when they want to control a computer. They would rather work in a Starbucks, H&M, or a shopping mall. So the basic demographic change in terms of work type has been shifting quite a lot. And we're really having a problem finding good workers. Some of the industry sector might be better, but for us, for apparel, for bags, shoes, we are all moving out. US-China trade war. A lot of time when we look at the news headlines, really tariff, what we call trade imbalance, unfair trade practices, IP. I listen to the US side, I listen to the China side. To be honest, I don't know who's right, who's wrong. And a lot of times when you can agree on something, that's what we call fair. When you cannot agree, then it's not fair. And things can be agreed at different situation, different point in time. So I think it's difficult to comment on that one. But what we know is China is rising. And it is threatening the interests of the United States. And I think we all can feel it. And that's why China will want to enter into discussions, quote-unquote discussions and agreements with the Chinese government, which we all can understand. And if I'm standing on the US side, I will see it the same way. So what does that mean to us? We got to understand that it's not only a trade deal that we will settle, but I think it's an ongoing friction that will happen between the US and China. And we need to take that as into our daily life. It's not like we will stay there and say, one deal done, you're finished. No, it will be ongoing, and it's more sectoral focus. You will see that maybe more on the tech sector, agriculture sector, less in certain sectors as well. But with the trade war, what does that mean to us as a consumer, especially the United States and brands? What we see is the uncertainties. Most of you will be related to industrial sector. It takes time to optimize a supply chain. Imagine for the past 10, 15 years, our US customer and us, we work so hard to finalize, to perfect the entire supply chain from the raw material to the shipping schedule, to the customs, processing, manufacturing, shipping going back to the US, duty optimization. It took years for us to make it happen. And every year we make some slight changes. But see what happened now. US came in within 1 year or two, changed all the games, rules of the games. Then all our customers are so busy figuring out what to do with it. They will call up Ron, they will call up different people to say, what are we going to do? Should I file a petition? Should I file another factory to start? It's like so busy, and they incur a lot of cost and time. So it's really hurting us. How do we plan? How do our customer plan, right? And for country, how do we plan to face the situation? Of course, price pressure, you can imagine. And because of such action, it's no longer saying China, you get a deal or not. But the fact is, customers will want to diversify, whether we like it or not, whether there's a deal with China or not. They will get out. And it leads to a good thing for us. It's our opportunity. Are we able to grab it? So it goes to my second section that I will quickly go through. Excuse me. As I work into different countries in Asia, I always ask myself, so what does Philippines get to offer? Why am I in the Philippines? We have close to 20,000 employees. And let's not look at England, but let's look outward as an investor, as an operator in multiple countries. How how do I see it and where do I find this maybe a challenge, but we can look at it in a different lens and say this is an opportunity. I'm going to just I want to share with you, this is just an indication of where we are. It is how easy we do business. Some people in the Federation came to ask me, oh, where should I move out from China? Oh, Vietnam land price is very expensive. Cambodia may be cheaper, maybe I should go to Bangladesh. I said at the end of the day, it's your execution. You can get the product made properly, in a good condition, and ship it out safely, make the money, collect the money, you're good. Yeah, maybe Bangladesh, but maybe you have worker safety issue, maybe logistics issue. In certain countries, you may not even to properly manage your labor, you have problem with your customer. That's why the land's cheap, okay? And so every sector has their own concerns that you need to understand how to execute. So in the Philippines, we need to look at it the same way. How do we make sure that for each of our key industries, do we have a good environment, infrastructure for our operator to execute their product? We have a lot of numbers, a lot of incentive policies. Can that be executed? So that will be a question I want to pose to you. And I think that resonates what Ron said earlier in the session, that with the FTA possibility, with more of the trade agreement, what does that mean to trigger ourselves? I think we talk about constitution reform, for example. What do we need to cater our change so that we can compete? We have all the trade agreements. We got benefit from GSP Update Act, GSP Plus from Europe, and I want to explain to you two interesting observations on Vietnam and US travel goods. So let me go to this slide. To your left, it's apparel. If you look at it, the red one is Vietnam, and where's the Philippines? It's hiding under Thailand. Okay? For the past almost 10 years, you can see Vietnam number going up very quickly. And do you, let me refresh your memory, Vietnam is about the same population as the Philippines. Okay? If you compare a lot of statistics, we are quite similar. But why does Vietnam move up so quickly? Okay, I would say partly infrastructure development, they are doing quite well, proximity to China, but one thing, during those times, there was been a discussion and negotiation on TPP. Our customer, our brand customer make decision based on what they see is going to happen. They see that TPP sounds like it's going to happen, except for Trump really throw it into the trash can. Okay, if not, they will even go even faster. But look at it. Our customer make decision not based on what they see now, what they see as the likely outcome of the future. FTA is the same. Okay, that's why we need. I mean, we are very vocal. We want the country to get FTA because we want. Even it will take years, but that direction, that discussion already will lead to our buyer, the Gap, the Uniqlo, the Coach. They will put in a lot of resources because this is the place that they want to go. And look at that, Vietnam is maturing. Why should they put all the eggs in one basket? They need to find one more country at least. Look at the number. They want one more country. Should we be the one, right? So there's a great opportunity here. Second one on your right, travel goods. Our company worked with Ron and some other our legal experts, government experts, and American Apparel Footwear Associations. We worked for many years to lobby for the US GSP Update Act, where travel goods will become duty-free. All other countries currently are in the past is all dutiable, around 15 to 20% duty into US. We work on it with our customer, Coach. The deal, the Update Act really got finalized and announced in 2016. But you look at the numbers. Our Philippine number went up starting from 2013. Let me see. 2013. No, sorry, for 2011. Our numbers start going up. 2011 is the time that we set up our first bags operation. And our competitors followed because Coach says, you all go. because coach is acting based on how they see the future. Not necessarily now, but we create the future. That's what I want to bring to you. I want to explain to you, we create the future here. And because of that, you can see the number, oh sorry, it's the blue one, not the red. Red one is Vietnam, the blue one. But our number went up. You can see that. In 2000, we started 2011, but you can see 12, 13, 14, 15, all the numbers going up. So you can see it's very important that we work as a partner with the government, with the industry sector, with our customer to make it happen. And it will take years, but we can see that it works. This is just an example of some of the other considerations that we will look at whenever we are looking at different countries. We look at the tax, we look at incentives. I would say that we are not too far off from our other Asian countries, but I want to bring this point to you that our government here that we're going to remain very competitive. We may have some natural disadvantage. For example, logistics. I've been talking to Tapestry, the company of Coach. He gave me a screenshot. He said, this is how many days it takes, not this one, but he showed me a chart, how many days it takes to ship from all the Asian country to the warehouse in the East Coast. They counted 50-some days with their own buffer. I said, why 50-some days? I did all the calculation with the shipping schedule, Trans-Pacific, whatever, it won't take 50-some days. He said, I cannot stretch a port. Okay, I worry about custom clearance. Your shipping schedule is not frequent enough. So the logistic head based in New York will need to budget for 50-some days. And Vietnam, my recollection, may be 45, 48 days. And China, then it looks far, but then it's efficient. They have bigger ship, bigger port, more efficient to bring it over. So we have certain natural advantage that we need to improve. But we weigh everything in, including the tax, the land, electricity bill, everything. We need to find ways to create our competitive advantage, and we will be attractive to some sectors. We may not be attractive to some other industry sectors. So it's fine, but then we need to improve. And this is the time, because the industry is still coming out from China. I'll explain a little bit more later in the next 1 or 2 minutes. But infrastructure, I can tell you, in Cambodia, I don't have too much problem talking on the phone when I'm in the car. But I have a problem in the Philippines when I'm trying to make a phone call from Clark to Bataan. And I try to call my colleagues in Clark. I always have a problem making the cell phone call. This is very basic. Port, right? So we are facing competition amongst our Asian countries. Electricity, just another example. Labor. I would say all countries are very unique in Asian, the Southeast Asia. And we are also quite particularly unique in terms of dealing with our labor. And we, the Philippines, we also need to educate our investors how to deal with it, because the culture is very different. I operate almost the same, almost 10,000 bags workers in Cambodia, Myanmar, and the Philippines. They are all very different. Educational level, Myanmar is very low. Our educational level of workers is relatively higher. So how do we communicate? How do we deal with them? How do we orient management team who come in? It's very important, because if we make the mistake, it creates a problem and it creates an unnecessary, unhealthy labor relations and with union. So this is an area that in certain countries they are doing quite well, I can tell you. I would say Cambodia, if you know how to deal with it, Myanmar is doing quite good now, Vietnam is doing quite good. So this is an area that I hope that we can work with the government and our labor representative to improve. This is last page on labor. Again, we are waiting on different days. Public holidays. You can see how many holidays, and I have not counted the local holidays. So how do I count the number of hours if I pay monthly? Labor relations, another one is really, we need to do it step by step. On benefits, how do we work with them? It takes time. And I think it's a matter of us as an employer doing what is right to do with trust, and we will work with them hand in hand. And that's why Loot has been operating for 30 years in the Philippines, and this is how and what we believe. Last thing, China. I noticed that during the conversation we talk about US FTA, GSP, but I also want to bring you another angle is really the China opportunity. Because China's e-commerce is really growing really fast. Our group, the Luntai, the 10 family, our group, we are the joint venture partner of Skechers. Do you know the November 11th day? They call it Singles Day. We just had it, as you know. One day, Skechers, what do you think is the number? 600 million RMB. One day. I still don't know how deep it could go. So almost 100 million US, one day of sales. So how can we benefit from it, from the Philippines? Not only looking at the US, but also looking into China. There could be things that we all can work it out. And also the second part is really the middle class, supporting e-commerce they will buy. The last point I want to bring to you, which is one big initiative I don't think I hear is Belt and Road. Chinese government is trying to orchestrate all the plans in all sectors, all levels. It could be cultural, academic, industrial, to go through Belt and Road. And Belt and Road, one big area is really Southeast Asia. So where's the Philippines? Where are the other countries? How do we benefit from it? They are trying to, the government is trying to orchestrate industry to go out, because they know the industry will need to go out. Rather than waiting for them to go out uncoordinated, they want to help to make sure the supply chain can go out with the least disruption. So one way to attract the Philippines investment into the Philippines, also we should engage not only the Taiwanese, which is good, but also the Chinese to bring them in and see what we all can do together. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Very much for that fascinating insight into what's happening on the business side. Clearly a lot of opportunities for the Philippines. I wish we could put all of those numbers together into one, so we actually knew what the business cost was. Now, looking beyond tariffs, what do businesses want to see in FTAs? We have Ms. Kelly Manapal. I've already introduced her, but so without further ado, maximum time, please, Kelly.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you, for the opportunity to be here with you today. I'm going to be moving us a little bit into a U.S. perspective. I was asked to speak about what American companies look for in a free trade agreement, understanding that it's something that Perry's been thinking about and working on for quite some time, and that we are at a bit of an inflection point in our relationship. Might be a good thing to overview. I think it's good to start to remember we call them free trade agreements, but actually trade agreements go far beyond trade, in essence they're requiring. Tariffs are really just a small piece of what is included in a trade agreement. Obviously from a U.S. Business perspective, one of the more appealing points in looking at a free trade agreement with the Philippines would be the tariff piece when it comes to autos and certainly when it comes to agriculture. Right now, including because of the China-US trade war, the U.S. agricultural community is under a great deal of stress. Lots of uncertainty, difficulty accessing credit, not necessarily knowing what kind of seed to put in the ground, given that, and I'm speaking from experience here from the middle of the United States in Nebraska, I'm a big corn and soy state, and it's very difficult right now. So that ag market access piece is particularly attractive, but it's not enough. U.S. companies tend to want to see all of these aspects that you see there in customs, investment provisions, IPR, where certainly the Philippines has advanced quite a bit of balance with work in recent years, etc. So it's important to think about free trade agreements as kind of a full package. Now, having said that, we've all seen what's happened under the Trump administration. There has been a bit of a tendency to look at these either mini deals or talking about a phase 1 and a phase 2 deal. That's a little bit of what we've done with Japan, where the initial phase 1 deal has been agreed upon. Understand it's gone through half of the legislature in Japan this week and hopefully will continue on its way. We're seeking a deal that would not be comprehensive, at least not yet, with the EU at this point, and have been talking to India. So although this is something that the Trump administration has been pursuing, again, in contrast to previous practice, where it was under both Democratic and Republican administrations more common to pursue what we would call these gold standard deals that were fully comprehensive and included all the aspects that I had on the previous slide. That shift in positioning, on the one hand, can create some opportunities. You can think about, okay, what could we talk about that would be less than a fully comprehensive deal? On the other hand, you have to remember that in our system, trade agreements need to go through the U.S. Congress. In our Constitution, Article 1 of the Constitution states that trade and commerce are under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Congress. A lot of that authority has been relegated to the executive branch over time, but still having it enshrined in the Constitution makes that dynamic incredibly important. And if you saw any of the reaction in the media, and we certainly felt it in Washington, to this approach that the United States government took with Japan of doing a phase 1 and then talking about doing a phase 2, the reaction was not positive. And the feeling being that, number one, if you do a partial deal, that you're really not leveraging all of the trades that can take place in a comprehensive negotiation. Secondarily, Congress wants to be involved in absolutely every step of the process when it comes to any negotiation. And if you do a mini deal, like we did in the Japan case, you don't necessarily have to go to Congress and ask for permission every step of the way. That dynamic plus has been referred to by a number of the other speakers of having increased unilateral trade actions by the Trump administration, the 301 investigation of China, which has led to the trade war, the national security cases on steel and aluminum, on auto parts. That dynamic has really led to a bit of mistrust, again, even among Republicans, perhaps even especially among Republicans that historically have been more aggressive on trade deals, to have this bit of a clash between the Congress and the executive branch over how really to implement trade policy and how comprehensive these deals need to be. So it's away and aside from our own domestic politics, which I'm sure you've seen is a bit of a soap opera right now. When you're talking about just the trade piece, it's a bit complex. So what I would argue for, and just to give a little bit of my background, I'm a former trade negotiator at USTR and worked on the Chile portfolio back in the day when we did not have trade promotion authority. Back then we called it fast track, the authority to be able to do an up or down vote on trade deals in the US Congress. But we wanted to try to make some advances with Chile. We wanted to see, would it be possible to do a free trade agreement? Were we ready to make those sorts of decisions? And in this case, what we did is what I would posit would be a good idea to think about in the Philippine case, which is we used our TIFA, our Trade Investment Framework Agreement. In that case, just as with the Philippines, it had been around since the 80s. And we found that that was a pretty good vehicle for making some advances. And as I've got here on my slide, and as many of you here in the room know because you've worked on this, there have been some good advances that have been made already under the U.S.-Philippine TIFA, ease of doing business initiatives, cold chain, et cetera. Customs. So there's already a good track record there. What I would posit would be at least interesting to consider would be to kind of amp that up, and I believe that's what the governments are talking about potentially doing next year. Giving my perspective as a private sector actor, I think that would be terrific. There are a number of issues that could be addressed in a bilateral way, in a very methodical way, by perhaps setting up working groups under the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, the TIFA, and allowing an opportunity for each of our private sectors to participate, to get a little bit of buy-in, to get a little bit of interest, and to make some progress on some of the key issues that would be at play within any trade negotiation that might occur in a more formal fashion going forward, to lay that groundwork and to make that progress in a way where you're not disrespecting our congressional requirements on trade and commercial authority to get the Congress involved early on. Can't ignore that. That would be, a real death wish to any possibility of doing a U.S.-Philippine FTA, but would allow us to make progress and to show that we're doing it in the proper way, and again, to build support. And in the Chile case, what we found is that it allowed us to advance on some of the delicate issues. Labor and environment in that case were big ones. We were able to build some trust, not just between the governments. There was already a good relationship and a good trust level between the governments, as there is, I think, between the United States and the Philippines. But really trust, bringing in the U.S. Congress and other stakeholders that allowed us to move forward. And as I say here, just to figure out what the right scope was after we were able to benchmark on some of our topics that we were addressing. But again, throughout the process, we were very, very careful to bring in the Congress, to let them know what was going on, even though it wasn't a real trade negotiation. It was really prep work. Free trade agreements take a really long time, even if the politics are perfect. And right now, I would argue our politics are not perfect in the United States. They're very complicated, and trade's never easy. Next year, it's no surprise we have a presidential election. Trade is typically, an easy target when it comes to our presidential elections. The way that our electoral college is set up and presidential votes are counted, the middle of the country, industrial Midwest in particular, has kind of an outsized importance. And so that creates a dynamic that makes really expressing support for a competitiveness agenda, which is what I would argue is how we should be talking about trade, is in terms of competitiveness, not in terms of just trade agreements. Talking about workforce training, talking about labor mobility, and a number of other issues that are frankly more important than trade agreements. But just the fact that the rhetoric around trade, and President Trump was elected in great part due to his really taking on board some of those more populist, labor-focused talking points that frankly Democrats used to be the ones to trumpet. He took those on and it was successful for him. So I think that we need to anticipate that the trade rhetoric in 2020 will not be any less complicated. As a matter of fact, it may be more complicated. So that's why I'm putting out this idea of just defining ways that we can lay the groundwork in a really pragmatic, technical way in order to advance on the relationship. And there's things you could look at. I put up the idea of sectorals. I think that would be a little bit more difficult, kind of looking at certain sectors of the economy and see where it could advance from a tariff standpoint. Probably the work that Ron's done on GSP is probably, as far as you're going to get, successfully on the tariff route. But I think there's other areas. I think regulatory best practices and exchanging views on that, benchmarking on that, to my mind, would be very important. Regulatory challenges are something we hear a lot about from various companies doing business here in the Philippines. I think that showing a goodwill to advance on those issues to make regulatory practices more consistent, more transparent would be something that would be incredibly well viewed and would really help to engender some support for this concept. We have, I participated in almost every USMCA, the new NAFTA round, and we really have an outstanding model in USMCA in the regulatory best practices chapter. So I think that that's something that is worth taking a look at from a Philippine perspective, just to see what's in there that's attractive. It's already been agreed upon by USTR and by major stakeholders in the United States, so it might be a nice model. Standards are another issue related that can be very important. I know you've been working on that in the United States already with respect to automobiles. Digital trade is a space where I think, again, the USMCA chapter is phenomenal and could provide a very nice model, might be worth looking at. And it's an area where I think that our countries could be very compatible. Definitely, need to make some advances on government procurement. And I think overall, just trying to find those quick wins, again, where we can engender mutual support and trust and, build a bit more of a momentum towards deepening the relationship further. This map is actually out of date, but and it's probably just won't read well either, but it's to give you an idea of what's going on in the world right now, with the United States really taking this pause, I'll call it, with respect to trade policy. Walking away from TPP, as has already been mentioned, I think will be looked at as really one of the biggest strategic errors that the United States has made with respect to its economic relationships in Asia, perhaps ever. Where we go forward from that is still an open question. But if you look at all of the activities, and you don't need to look at this because it's half of what's actually going on in the region, the fact that China is so active in Southeast Asia, Europe is so active in Southeast Asia, does create, from the U.S. perspective, a bit more focus, and maybe that's what we needed to really get the United States back to the table, back to a more proactive engagement with Southeast Asia. Just thought I'd very quickly, and then I'll close because I think we're running a little behind, talk about some of the key stakeholders in the United States. As I said, Congress is first and foremost. We can't reinforce that enough. But we do have a very, although it's not being addressed in that structured of a way anymore under the Trump administration, but we do have a typically quite structured interagency process. So pulling all these various government entities into any sort of discussions that would be going on under the TIFA or otherwise would be important. Very formal trade advisory process, again, it's being treated a bit more informally these days. But I think this slide is the most important one, and I'll close with this, that as any sort of a TIFA process, intensified TIFA process would be pursued in 2020, hopefully to advance our discussions. There's a number, and you all know these stakeholders better than I do, but a number of key stakeholders that I do think would be very important from a Washington perspective to pull in. The Philippines has a lot of friends in Washington. At McClarty Associates, we've got two former ambassadors, U.S. ambassadors to the Philippines, Tom Hubbard and John Negroponte, in our leadership. And so two of your biggest advocates are down the hall from me. But I do think that as considerations of intensifying our discussions go forward, pulling those folks in and having some of these various stakeholders feel like they have some ownership as well would be useful. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Kenny. Can I ask you to hold on to the questions? We have two discussants. I might ask you to join us up on the stage. First of all, we have the Honorable Coco Pimentel. He is, the key person in all of this, speaking about Congress. He is the chairperson of the Senate Committee on Trade, Commerce and Entrepreneurship, as well as the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. He is also the former Senate President. He has been a bar top notcher and a National Youth Commissioner. He's a fellow with the Aquilino Pimentel Institute, which promotes leadership and governance to promote political and economic reforms to strengthen democracy. And Mr. Bill Lewis, who is the Associate Director with the IALA Corporation. He's also a member of the APEC Business Advisory Council. and he is currently chairman of the Liverpool City's Challenge Project. He has been Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Ayala Foundation and Executive Director of the Mataki Business. So I might ask Senator to come to the others.
Good afternoon to all of you. I will just be brief. This is a reaction to the three presentations that I have witnessed. First of all, congratulations to the DTI for organizing this forum. Palakpakan po natin ang ating DTI. And to our three presenters who gave us very good insights and information, also very important information. And I'd like to greet also my good friend, His Excellency, the Ambassador from Hungary. Ambassador, Your Excellency. So my take from my insight that I got from the presentation of ASEC FD is that it's important to start talking about the deficit. Because when I was appointed as the Trade Committee Chairman, that is the first information I required my staff to get. What is the balance of trade with each of the countries we are trading with? And some say we should not worry about the trade deficit, but I say we should start talking about the trade deficit. So 47 billion pesos in trade, $47 billion, sorry, in trade deficit. $13 billion from China, if I'm not mistaken. And then we try to justify this by saying that maybe these are goods made for our own production. We looked at intermediate goods at 57%, consumption goods 70%. But hidden in the others, as a DTI, look into the others. The others is 20%, and maybe some of the consumption goods are hidden there in the others. So the challenge is for us to do better data gathering and data keeping. We cannot just lump a significant portion, 20% greater than consumption, into others not expressly specified. I think that is the category. So every time since I was the chairman of the Committee on Foreign Relations, when I talk to our counterparts, the diplomats, I always tell them, buy more from the Philippines, especially when I attend trade exhibits involving Chinese goods. And there are Chinese representatives. I say, buy more from the Philippines, because without knowing this $13 billion deficit, I knew we are running a deficit in China. So what does the former ambassador, Ambassador Chow, my good friend, told me? He told me how did he react when I challenged him to buy more from the Philippines? They say we are ready to buy more. We have set aside $1 billion, and then we added $500 million to make it $1.5 billion. But where are your goods? That is the question. So, my dear friends, the topic is about FTA. The verdict is not yet out whether FTA makes you a more developed country or you're already developed. That's why you enter into an FTA. Is an FTA good to the country or not good? So I think the answer is it depends. So we approach FTAs on a case-to-case basis. But we should be ready to trade something, because zero tariff of the zero goods is actually nothing. As a mathematician, if we have nothing to trade and then the tariff is zero, what benefit did we get? So, and of course, Mr. Sanitan Thank you for your inputs also. Also raised by ASEC, the uncertainty is going to hurt business. And long-term policy is embodied in law. That's why it's very important to elect the right lawmakers and then also lobby. But constantly lobby, pressure them, teach them about, according to the good ASEC, let us embody in our laws the good practices already observed by the countries. Because this is long term. Okay, and then thank you, Mr. Tan, for raising the issue of holidays in the Philippines. Because without you knowing it, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about that in the Senate, how to rationalize our holidays. But we took some consolation when you showed us Malaysia's number of holidays, 50 holidays. So, yeah. Because Mr. Tan is correct, 21 plus the local, and then plus the informal ones, because we sandwich some days, and then when it's Christmas time, there are undeclared holidays. So we are already looking into this, but we are having a difficult time given our culture. So we learned a lot in this seminar, and Ms. Hawk also tells us that you must involve Congress in the FTA negotiation or DTI. Involve us, not every step of the way, but involve us, because you know what? An FTA is a treaty. That is the basic characteristic of an FTA. That is a treaty, which requires Senate concurrence. Unfortunately, in the Senate, I'm also the chair of the Foreign Relations, it is take it or leave it. We cannot amend a treaty presented to us. So involve us while it is still taking its final shape. So thank you for involving me, DTI, in this conference, because I have learned a lot. I took some notes, and let us continue with our collaboration and for the good of our country. So thank you very much.
Okay, well, some very clear points there from please.
Thank you, yeah. Actually, I want to pick up where the Senator left off, which is the involvement portion. So first I want to thank DTI for inviting me to participate today and to get involved. I know you've been running the One Country, One Voice meetings, I think around the country. Personally, it's my first time to participate in one of these, but I would suggest that maybe you could, if it hasn't been done yet, consider institutionalizing sort of a permanent roundtable group that can periodically sit down and discuss these issues. I don't know how often the Export Development Council or the Industry Development Council sit down to meet to discuss these types of issues, but maybe this is something that should be done on a larger scale with the business community and also involving members of Congress, both House and Senate, because I think it will be a valuable exercise, and listen to the views of both local and foreign investors. That would be my first reaction. I'd like to also thank the speakers for their presentations today. Extremely useful, 3 different points of view, but very practical, and I think there are lessons to be learned by policymakers led by DTI. Let me just say at the outset, just so I emphasize, just 3 points. One is representing APAC. APAC's view has always been for free, balanced, open trade. That has been the hallmark, I think, within the APEC discussions, the free trade area of the Asia Pacific, and notwithstanding the negative views about globalization and global trade. Nonetheless, it's recognized that global trade has helped lift more people out of poverty over the last 20 or 25 years. Though it has not been perfect, it has caused problems. So that is the general view between among the APAC members. Now, APAC represents all 21 member economies, but it's the private sector view, the APAC Business Advisory Council. So that represents the private sector view within the APAC community. The second point I wanted to point out is our trade picture, that of deficit. I think sometimes we should ask ourselves the question of whether this is a reflection of our investment policy and our investment performance. Do we have a product-to-market mismatch, as it were, because we are not producing products that the markets need? And I'll go back to Sanitan's example, which is when Lumentai entered the market to produce the bags, that in fact their exports to the US, that was the inflection point, and you could see it begin to go up. So precisely, I think that we need to be aware that we need to attract investors or encourage local investors to produce the goods which our markets need. So it's not just about trade and tariffs and non-tariff barriers, but I think we need to look at many things: logistics, human resources, customs procedures, and our investment policies. And finally, I just want to stress one of the areas within APAC that we spent some time discussing is services, or more specifically trade in services. So most of the times discussions are focused on merchandise trade, but we like to also focus on services because that happens to be a strong suit for the Philippines. Services constitute more than half of GDP for the Philippines and more than half of employment. So these are businesses both attracting inbound and outbound movement, but which contribute greatly to the Philippine economic performance. In particular, I would mention 7 or so businesses which we are looking at closely within APAC Philippines. This would be the IT-BPM, BPO industry, creative industries, tourism, construction and engineering, the maritime industries, healthcare, and education. Just 3 of them, IT, BPM, tourism, and construction, make up 26.2% of Philippine GDP and 25% of total employment, for about 10 million jobs. If we count also the contribution of OFWs as services, of course, then you can appreciate how the country is a leader in services, and that is our if you want to look at it, people are our leading asset. So while it is easy to measure the merchandise trade, merchandise exports and imports, I think we need to have a close look also at services and continue to promote services. And for this particular area, I think we should be looking at mobility of labor as policy which will favor the Philippines. We have large labor force, educated workforce, and high literacy in English. So labor mobility works to our advantage, and that's something that we should continue to support. So those are my 3 main points. Thank you.
Just a quick point of clarification. That trade is, that doesn't include the OFW businesses. That doesn't include any capital account.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Ed, for that clarifying. So basically, the figures presented earlier not only covers trading goods, and of course, when you talk about international trade, it covers also a lot of areas such as services and also investment. So if I may just add, on goods, yes, that's a deficit. The senator was correct. Under the 3 categorization, there's another category that is those set of goods that are not expressly specified. meaning it could either be consumption goods or intermediate goods. But again, of course, these are just straight analysis based on the presentation. On services, gathering data is quite difficult for purposes of determining if you are in surplus or in deficit. But initial data, it would appear that Philippines will be competitive on services.
I think it's surplus on the services side. And if we include OFW remittances, as Bill was suggesting, I think there's quite a substantial surplus which really makes up on the capital account side. But anyway, I think the point is really taken there. And it's a much longer debate that we're trying to have as we walked into the room. But I'm going to abuse the prerogative I have as the chair, which I think that's a really interesting point. And I wanted to take advantage of having Kelly here. Is when you have these consultations as USTR with Congress, is that with the actual Congress people? Is that done at the staff level? Because I just want to sort of picture that a little bit, because I know these are really detailed and extremely technical conversations as far as my memory serves.
They are.
Yeah.
They're incredibly technical. So our committees of jurisdiction for trade on the House side is House Ways and Means, and on the Senate side it's Senate Finance. And so what you find is that the discussions will be at the staff level. Each of those committees will have staffers that are incredibly expert on the technicalities of trade. Many of them served there for years and years and years. And so the consultations are first with them. And it's interesting because you do find, especially now, where President Trump has really kind of turned conventional wisdom on its head by having a Republican president who is taking positions like making wages a component of rules of origin, like trying to get very aggressive labor enforcement in agreement now that he's negotiating as USTR is negotiating with the Democratic Congress. So it's one of those consultations where party matters, but getting to a pragmatic solution matters more at the staff level, and then once it elevates to the actual member level, that's where it gets more political.
Do you have any advice for us on how would we get, say, U.S. Congress involved or on side for a U.S.-Philippines FTA at this point in time?
Honestly, I would not even say FTA. I would say we are going to do an intensified TIFA. We are going to get to know each other better. We are going to level set and benchmark on regulations, standards, government procurement, intellectual property, whatever the case might be. And I think that it's one of those situations where our politics are so complex right now in Washington that I would rather see the substance pull the matter than to engage politically at all.
I have a whole bunch of slides. Oh, please, there's a gentleman towards the back of the room, please, sir. Could I ask you to identify yourself and state your name and your institution as well?
Hello.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the IR for hosting this event. And also, thank you, Senator Pimentel, for attending this event. My question is all about the deficit of our trade going to become more international. Because I'm also a former OFW, so I former OFW, and I set up a company here in the Philippines also. And one of the things that they remember for the Filipinos are we are a migrant worker, expats, and I'm from the service and technology industry here in the Philippines. And my name is Paul Miguel, sorry. My question is all about what is the legacy of the Philippine government for us not to go already as migrant worker and we want to become more internationally known as entrepreneur, Filipino entrepreneur, because we want to grow. We want to become international well known in international arena in terms of entrepreneurship. Thank you.
Thank you for that very important question. You raised several things. One, to trade deficit, and of course, opportunities for our OFWs, among others. On the matter of trade deficit, one reflection, and of course, I would say a very important point raised by Sir Bill earlier, is that when he propounded the question if whether or not our deficit reflects also the status of our investment. I think that's a very important correlation, because if you factor in the fact that a country like the Philippines is a developing country, then what immediately comes to mind is that the usual products that a developing country or least developed countries can export would be raw materials, agricultural products, or forest products. And the high value items are industrial goods. And for you to produce or manufacture industrial goods, it will take a lot of investment. You need money. So if you will see the transition of some economies, like for example Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam, then you will see the correlation that first thing is that there is, I would say, a surge of investment. So foreign companies with, of course, money, enough capital to put up certain businesses can penetrate the market or access the market, and there put up factories, manufacture products, and then exports. That's why automobiles like Fortuner, Ford Everest, these are Japanese products, technically, Japanese companies, but they are manufactured in Thailand and Indonesia, and from there, taking advantage of Antigua, they export us to the Philippines, among others. That's why you will note that we have a very high trade deficit with these countries because of these high-value products. On our part, what happened during the period when we are attracting investment is that we were able to capture electronics, ignition wiring, machineries. Well, of course, in terms of value, I'm not an expert on valuation, but offhand, what comes to mind is that, of course, these vehicles or automobiles are high-value items. But the good thing is that we maintain electronics products here in the Philippines. And if you will factor in maybe the development and technology, maybe in the future, in developing future products, that will be of help for the country. That's one. Second is on the matter of services. Because in free trade agreements, or international trade for that matter, one aspect that you should give importance also is the aspect of services. Market access for services. Services covers a lot of things. So in other words, you provide an opportunity, an environment for your companies to in a way penetrate certain market or your trading partner in particular. That's where you lay down the foundation where, let's say, Jollibee, our construction firm, can penetrate other markets. Now, one aspect of services would be professional services. And I think this is very important because in that negotiation, you have to, of course, as an offensive interest for the Philippines, and this is what we have been actively pushing also, is that we want to create an environment wherein our professionals can have that opportunity or access in other countries wherein they can, of course, practice their profession or engage in other areas of services. So in other words, not just in the aspect of employment, but also in the aspect of either practicing your profession or engaging into certain business ventures. Thus, you negotiate, let's say, capital requirements, nationality requirements, and of course, other regulations for that matter. So, with goods, if I will go back to goods, then it appears that there is some sort of a sequential process, especially, as I mentioned, if you are a least developed or a developing country. So, there's so many aspects that you talk about in a negotiation. Kelly mentioned earlier also intellectual property rights, which is very important. Because if you want to attract investment, then you have to make sure that the IPRs of these multinational or these companies or investors will be protected in your country. It will not be copied. Because otherwise, they will leave your country and, of course, locate somewhere else. So basically, that's the scenario. I hope I was able to address your question.
Senator Pimentel, did you want to comment on this one?
bring Paul's attention to a certain law, RA 11337, the Philippine Startup Program. So, test this law, apply it, and then you give me feedback of what are the shortcomings of the law, if any, etc. Then, yeah, you know, because ladies and gentlemen, when we craft laws, more or less that's the theory and the framework. We have to test how it is implemented in reality. So, according to Paul, he said there's still no IRRs or part of the culture, the delay in the implementing rules and regulations. But we can rush the agency to come up with the IRR. But what is more important is test the law or try the law, avail of the benefits of the law so you can give the lawmakers feedback. Oh, sir, you missed this. Sir, we lack this. There's a loophole in the law, etc.
Yes, sir. It's already published. We are really thankful for that initiative already by the Philippine government, and we are looking forward for more legacy someday. For us as the next generation leaders for industry, and also for not only just the industry, also we want to become a manufacturing country someday. So we are aiming for the Philippines to manufacturing someday that new technology here. And thank you again, sir, for 11337. Thank you.
Because sometimes when a legislator has successfully passed a law, he or she believes that the world is already great and is perfect. So we need people to try out the law, implement it, and then give us feedback. You missed something, you forgot this one. These things happen.
Yeah, the devil is in the details, and IRRs are important. But I commend you for the aspiration and the plan and the ambition to move in that direction, because I believe that's a promising direction for Philippine entrepreneurs and for the Philippines. As I said, always the service sector has been kind of forgotten in the trade discussion because of our focus on merchandise trade. But as an example, you can perform a service here and sell a service offshore. You can sell the software and whatnot offshore as a product or a service. Or if you take a look, there are other businesses where the service is stuck into the business. If I take a look at, say, the aircraft maintenance services, that's a large-scale, high-investment type of activity, but which makes use of Filipino skilled labor in a service industry, repairing aircraft in the Philippines for the international market. So it's a good example of where you marry that skill with a high capital intensive type of industry. So it's something that I think we should always continue to focus on. The other thing I wanted to say is that because everyone's so preoccupied with merchandise trade, and they normally think it's all responsibility of DTI, but in fact we run a lot of I suspect we run a lot of trade deficits on agricultural products as well. So that's something that I think needs to be looked at.
I just wanted to, I guess the economist in me is going to come out, and I said when we talk about trade deficits in agriculture, a little bit of care needs to be taken. We're really talking about the terms of trade. So what we really need to do is I think, move up the value chain. So I think if we can do the high value add products and say that we seem to be doing and are articulating within the PDP, say for cacao and cocoa, then we can afford to buy, say, low value add products. And then you run less of a deficit. But that's just the economics. I just wanted to, we don't have to be stuck in that road forever, as long as we can train up and move up that value chain. And again, that value chain framework, I think is really important for thinking through this. We got that a lot in the Secretary's discussion. We talked about the license being in the R&D thing. And when we, for Asset Deputy, when you talked about the electronics part, the interesting discussion is where we ended up in the electronics value chain? How much will we able, which tasks in the electronics value chain will we able to capture? And that's really trying to capture different tasks in the value chain. But anyway, the questions are really flowing in here, so I do encourage you to raise your hands. But I've got a question here, which is, how do you find the balance in trade and services labor and the brain drain question? Is this something, I'll repeat this, because maybe this is something that you also, a balance between trade and services labor and brain drain. Bill, we've talked about this a lot over the years that we've known each other as well. This is really the labor mobility stuff. We've discussed this for many, many years, Bill, so I know you're going to have a view on this.
So,
brain drain issues.
actually, if you take a look at globally, if you take a look at the job market and the supply of workers market, there is a mismatch. And many countries complain about this. Some of that mismatch is actually just, what I call seasonal or temporary. So you can fill the gap. So one of the things that a labor mobility policy could address is just to allow the movement of people just on a temporary basis, just to fill gaps. It's what the old contract workers used to do, fill a job and then come back. And the benefits are felt by both the sending and the receiving country. So we should be looking at that aspect. The brain drain side, of course, the reason we have a brain drain is because it's really a lack of opportunity as well here. So that we're almost forcing people to opt out of the country and opt in somewhere else because they're in search for a career, in search of a job, in search of an opportunity. So we have to give more options. One of the reasons why I think we have a high number of OFWs, roughly 10 million, is that's not all out of choice. Some of it, a lot of it's out of necessity. So if we were to, this is one of the reasons why we want to build up a very competitive country and to build up the infrastructure and the underlying services here. Because then that will allow people at least the option to make a decision, I want to stay. I want to go back again to what Sunny presented, because it's so specific. The internet speed and bandwidth, the logistics efficiency or inefficiency to move goods in and out, the cost of labor. So these are the things that investors factor in. And if they stack up favorably for companies, so we create more job opportunities, I think that brain drain will not be as much of a problem. So it's all about fixing some of the underlying issues here. Now, we have to be careful because, we used to think that brain drain is going to run forever. But the reason there's a brain drain is because people think or know that we have that particular skill level that maybe they don't have, and so therefore they would need to bring them over. And that was because this is based on a very good educational system, or what we thought was a good educational system. But in the latest PISA rankings at OECD, now we know it's not. On a range of 79 countries, we were rock bottom or second from bottom. So, brain drain is not going to last forever. If that workforce becomes progressively unskilled or uneducated, there's going to be no demand for them overseas, and not much demand for them domestically. So brain drain is not forever also. We need to address that particular issue.
We need to keep upscaling though.
Absolutely.
One of the questions I really wanted to ask was what's the productivity? The cost might be marginal, but what's the productivity rate? Are there differences in the productivity that the output that you get for the different ASEAN workers? Do you know what they're like? Or productivity or even creativity? I'm trying to look for the answer. Why are you here?
I would say for productivity-wise, a big portion of it is really coming from the management. And what we know for sure is productivity in China is way better than all the Asian countries. And there's a reason for that. Because if you notice, most of those are being produced in Guangdong, and I explained that those are migrant workers from other provinces. They come in just to work and make money. They don't mind overtime, they don't mind bonus, as such. They really work hard because they just want to bring the money back. Compared to Asian countries, here, Philippines or even Cambodia, we are talking about the workers living in the proximity. After they finish the work, they will go back home. They don't, in China, it's violation, but then if you ask them to work 1 full month, no day off, they will do it, if this is allowed. But here in the Philippines, maybe if you do it on Sunday, they will really complain. Or every other Sunday, they almost go to the street, right? So culturally, it's different. So we need to accept the fact that productivity will be different, and we need to find another way to handle it. How we handle it is we use semi-automatic machines. So partial automation, simplify the work procedure, educate the line leader, the junior management staff, as we talk about the skill set of our people. People are quite well educated, and even at the workers level compared to the other Asian country. So we should leverage it. Look for the good part of each country. In the Philippines, I will look at the line leader. How do we train them to make the teamwork to operate better to improve productivity? I hope I could answer your question.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up a little bit on some of the slides that you had. This is a question that I got from Slido. So, Senator Pimenta, if I may, there were some concerning slides that Sunny showed. And the question was, what are lawmakers doing to reduce the cost of doing business post-Arthur Law? So we have the Arthur Law, and how about the cost of power? That was one question that seemed to concern people around it.
No solution yet. There's no solution yet, but we are aware of that. We have to look at the taxes, and I'm telling my staff not only taxes but the permits, the licenses, the rates, because the theory of the permits is that you only charge a permit fee to sustain or to maintain the permitting system. Look at the charges being charged for permits. We have to also take a look at that. So the power is a very big problem ko talaga yan. We must admit. But the focus is there, including the holidays, ano pa ba? What are we doing with that? So taxes, electricity, the holidays. The ports is for the build, supposed to be to answer, that's the build program, supposed to introduce the golden age of infrastructure in the Philippines. Airports and ports. Ports are emphasized there in that program. So we just have to really be vigilant and see if our ports have improved or not.
Let me just add on the ease of doing business, just to reassure Sunny and the rest of you here. So the good news is the chart you showed is last year's ease of doing business chart. So where we did rank 124th. Okay, so the good news is this year's data, which only got reported about a few weeks ago, we moved up to 95. So there's been an improvement from 124 to 95. Now on the, I noticed you have a special chart on taxes. Okay. We've held steady, it's the same, 94, 95 year on year. So we need, there's room for improvement. There's room for improvement there. But Eduardo, I think in answer to your question about what can be done for improving ease of doing business, I think it's to focus more on the automation of the process for filing for an application or for a license. In many countries, you can do a lot of these things online. For those people who do business here, part of the time it's online, but most of the time, I think we still physically line up. We still physically fill out pieces of paper. We still slot the traffic.
This is the integration of the work of the ICT and the e-government.
Yes, exactly. So the ICT and all the agencies that have to do with grant, including local government units, to do with granting a license or permit, even a simple mayor's permit, still not.
Good. I'm trying to keep my eye on the room to make sure there aren't any questions from the floor. I still have a lot of questions. And this is one, those of you who know me will know that this is a question that's very close to my heart. So and this is a question for you, that coffee and cacao are priority sectors for a number of regions. And so I wanted to ask, how can the FTAs help these sectors? You know, I wanted to get a bit more clarity. Can the FTAs help these sectors? Will they help to improve market access? We know that agricultural products remain the sectors where there remain very high tariffs. These are where the tariff peaks exist. So can the FTAs help? Is that something that we're looking at? So coffee and cacao, I care about it.
Thank you, Ed, for that question. Well, of course, an FTA is one platform wherein you can negotiate to secure enhanced market access for agricultural products like cacao and coffee.
Any of I talked about our need to move up the value chain, so I think that's important.
But of course, more than that is that you have to understand also that one sector that is very sensitive when it comes to FTA will be the agricultural sector. And you will notice that in any country, this is a sector that's very sensitive. The farmers' welfare will have to be considered when you negotiate. But again, while you are pursuing also market access for these agricultural products, you have to factor in also, I would say, the processed products for this agricultural, how you can, of course, manage to create more value so that when you export, of course, you can generate more revenues, not only for the farmers, producers, but even for the traders and manufacturers handling these products.
So that's the quid pro quo. We would have to liberalize our agriculture sector to get better market access for theirs. That's the quid pro quo. So Bill?
Eduardo, like you, I wake up and get excited when you mention coffee. Because I happen to drink a lot of coffee. But I also happen to be a co-founder of the Philippine Coffee Board. So, will an FTA help? Actually, the issue is not the FTA, the issue is the production. It's the production of coffee and the consumption of coffee. To begin with, the Philippines produces we grow only about 30,000 metric tons of coffee a year. We consume about 180,000 metric tons of coffee a year, green bean equivalent. So we are automatically importing 150,000 metric tons of coffee. And if we were to grow that coffee locally, it would all be consumed locally anyway, to begin with. So I think our first challenge is let's produce more coffee. People always say let's roast more, but you know, if you want to roast more, you build more roasting capacity. If you don't have coffee, you will import the coffee to roast. So you will just increase your import. So we need to just get the production side going, and then we think about the value added. But where the FTA works is that what we can do is we can take the higher valued coffee and export that, and then buy the lower valued coffee, because we're using that lower valued coffee basically for instant coffee. Okay? And then the higher valued coffee is the stuff that, you know, baristas all over the world turn into lattes and cappuccinos and whatever, frappes or whatever they make with these things. So that's the route we should go, but it boils down to production. We need to grow more coffee. So cacao is the same. We make excellent cacao, chocolate, but we import a lot because we just happen to love chocolate.
So I love chocolate.
Yeah, I love chocolate too.
All right. So I'm being told that the time's up, so no more comments, any final comments from the panel? So can I just ask you all it's been a really entertaining and informative session. Can I just ask you to join me in thanking this panel? Thank you so much.
Yusek Berry, can we ask you to please come on stage for a photo? Can we invite the other ambassadors to come up, please? Ambassador Basilio, Ambassador Serene. Yes, for a photo, please. Ambassador Serene and Ambassador Basilio.
Okay naman, sir. Napuputol. Kanina napuputol eh. Napuputol po. Mas pinagpalit naman.
So thank you very much to our very engaged speakers and discussants, and of course to Mr. Ed Mendoza for steering the discussions for session 3. We will have a 10-minute break. So we would like to please come back by 3:56. So we were talking about coffee and cacao, so you can have your caffeine fix outside, but of course we don't have chocolate, but you have coffee outside. And I would like to remind the participants to please start answering the evaluation forms that will be collected at the end of the forum. Thank you.
What better case than to meet the boss at the negotiation?
Well, we're in Charleston, by the way, the World Trade Organization is the place where countries come to talk about trade, negotiate trade, so new rules, new disciplines, and also keep an eye on each other's practices.
what we took into account.
We're not like referees that blow the whistle on a foul or something like that. You see, I sit up there at the presiding table, but it's the governors that run the show.
And we, the WTO staff, are here to help them.
By cooperating in the WTO, we ensure that economic tensions will not lead to more serious confrontation. This is why governments, right after the Second World War, negotiated trade rules, because they knew that economic cooperation is the key to peace and prosperity.
The governments are members of the WTO, they are the organization. The WTO has big and small economies all under one roof. Everyone has a voice and a seat at the table.
They agree on rules and principles, they figure out their differences and decide the way forward.
These also create stability. That's what businesses need to thrive. That leads to jobs and growth.
Yes, and the global economy is changing by the day, so the WTO has to evolve to help the members meet these challenges. And you see, the trade systems are constant. What is there, you will notice, you take it for granted. And once you take it away, you will notice. That's true.
So the records it's supposed to be aligned. It's like it's very key for regulators to know what's going on and to understand the technology. This communication is to build a bridge between the blockchain community and the trade community and try to explain in simple terms to trade officials what this technology is about, what it can do and what it cannot do.
Blockchain could enhance the transparency and traceability of supply chains without a policy environment that allows the technology to thrive. We may be losing the opportunity to make international trade more efficient and more inclusive. In fact, a recent study has estimated that the gains from blockchains could deliver $3 trillion of value worldwide by 2030. While technology opens interesting opportunities, it also raises legal, regulatory, and policy issues that deserve our attention.
The blockchain has obviously many different opportunities when it comes to international trade. Because the transactions are linked and blockchain state, it makes traceability easier. It enables also to facilitate a number of processes, border procedures, for example, because you have all actors that have access to the same information in real time. These actors do not talk to each other, they work in silos, they do not share data, and do not necessarily trust each other. So it's very powerful to have a technology that allows these different actors to work together in a way and trust each other, so that the trust comes from the technology. It's very important for regulators to keep that in mind and to see what their role should be and what they can do to allow the technology to really reach its full potential and to really make a difference.
When we receive notifications, clear requirements, they need to disseminate this as widely as possible to the private sector and to any stakeholder with an interest in that project or trade.
Esta plataforma permite generar diálogo entre aquellas entidades interesadas en una profesión en particular, puesto que permite intercambiar información, comentarios, atenciones respecto a la regulación que está pronta en el caso. Uno de los principales beneficios del desafío son presentar a tiempo dicha comentaria y así evitar de manera oportuna una posible barrera a la ciudad.
Recently, the European Union had a revolution in cooking, and this was very important to know because we export to that market. The industry needed to get the notification directly. We were able to discuss this in real time. We were able to sit among the peers and industry colleagues, discuss how they could
the business review and come up with a whole position to then submit a copy through the bid. The community is a good exporter of automotive parts, and we can get through notifications from eBay the changes in regulations in other countries as to the specifications and the technical requirements of their needs, so that exporters will immediately know and be able to adjust the products that they deliver.
eBay tool is actually very powerful. It gives you many more functions than just an alert. And some of these very interesting functions are particularly relevant to WTO inquiry points.
The other point is playing a number of roles, ensure that stakeholders are trained and registered on how to use the eBay, monitor the regular developments with the WTO members. The inquiry point is also involved in initiating discussions of relevant notifications that are disseminated within the eBay with the stakeholders in the private sector.
I encourage you all to use this platform, and best of all, it's also free. So please join the eBay ecosystem.
I hope that the participants will find their way back to the ballroom. We would like to now start with a synthesis and wrap up. So, and also I'd like the participants to please not forget to fill up the evaluation forms that we have DTI include the future OPCOM forums that we will be hosting. So at this point, I would like to introduce to you Ambassador Antonio Basilio, who himself is a former director of the Bureau of International Trade Relations. He will provide a synthesis and wrap-up for the sessions. He is a career foreign service officer who served in London, Beijing, Jeddah, and Washington, D.C. He has extensive experience in APEC, in senior official meetings, as well as ASEAN, the Committee on Trade and Investment. He was the special trade representative of the Philippines to the Uruguay round negotiations. He was resident representative and chairman of the Manila Economic and Cultural Office from 2001 to 2016, and served as executive director of the Philippine National Committee for the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, executive director of the International Secretariat of the APEC Business Advisory Council, and Secretary General of the Philippine chapter of the International Chamber of Commerce. He is currently director of the board of Strat-Based Consulting. Please welcome Ambassador Basilio.
Thank you, Anne. I warned you that your introduction might be longer than my wrap-up summary. I know that I stand between you and Secretary Agdi, and you're getting out to avoid traffic to wherever you're going, so I'm going to be very brief. There's always a danger in summarizing, particularly such rich discussions that we had today. I inevitably will either underrepresent, sometimes overrepresent, but that will be misrepresent the points that are made today in relation to this very important topic. So I will do the popular thing. The rapporteurs have prepared very extensive notes. I think they will be posted, as well as the presentation of all the speakers today. So you will have your own opportunity to summarize them more properly or aptly than I can. So I would just like to share with you some of my major takeaways. This morning, the Secretary started the talk by saying this event is part of the DTI's mechanism for consulting with its stakeholders, the business community, the academic community, the civil society, and the other government agencies that it works with in formulating its portion of our country's economic policy, in particular our trade policy. And the first takeaway that I got from his presentation, and something that was repeated throughout the day, is that industrial policy, our industrial policy begets our trade policy. That trade policy is meant to support our industrial policy. And our trade policy is a combination of several factors, not just free trade, but shading more towards fair trade, where it combines the promotion of our exports, the industrial promotion, but also taking into account safeguards against unfair trade practices and the protection of consumer welfare. The second takeaway is that our national competitiveness is the foundation for our trade development, trade policy. And that competitiveness is a factor of several, which were pointed out by the various presenters. One, of course, is that it depends on the combination of factors that address our national capability, for example, education, so highly educated and skillful workforce, but also issues that affects our competitiveness, like our business colleague mentioned, infrastructure, logistics, taxation, in general, ease of doing business. These are all important. And then Bill highlighted the importance of services because in manufactured goods today, a large proportion of it is accounted for by services. Things like logistics, banking, even advertising, research and development. So all of those require our attention, require that we address them. The point was also raised about the importance of developing our manufacturing capacity. As Secretary Togo said, we cannot just export our way out of trade deficit, but we need to industrialize to address our trade deficit. And although it may sound like import substitution 2.0, it actually meant to address our ability to move up the value chain, because these products, particularly the 5 main products that he mentioned, are critical inputs to our ability to improve our manufacturing capacity. In terms of improving our manufacturing capacity, that requires also attracting foreign direct investments. And that was addressed by several speakers. Our members of Congress have shown that they're aware of the issues. Some of the measures are pending now in Congress to address this, and some of course they've been made aware of, and hopefully they will continue to be addressed. And finally, China-US trade war is going to be a more or less permanent fixture because these are two competing economies. There may be a settlement in the short term, phase one as they call it, but in the long term it will be a competition for markets, for technology and capital between these two major economies. And so it would be to our advantage if, for example, in attracting locators who may want to move out of China to avoid the tariffs to relocate to the Philippines. And so, aside
aside from addressing our own inadequacies in terms of our the attractiveness of our investment environment, in China, Philippine, US FTA would certainly give us a leg up over competition. So that's my takeaway. As I said, the presentations are available online, and the summary I think that our rapporteurs will also be on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Basilio. That was a very crisp summary, but of course also very substantive. Before I call on Isaac Hepty to deliver the closing remarks, let me just say a very special thank you to Mr. Ed Pedrosa for moderating all of the sessions. And I would like to invite all the participants who have, remained up to the end to please gather in the middle. We will ask the photographer to please stay on stage so we have a crowd shot of everyone. So can we have a photographer on stage? We will all gather in the middle. As we all say, if it's not on social media, it did not happen. So let's go down and gather.
Idol pa pulang na.
Sir, tapos na yun. Last na to, sir. Mag-picture na lang. Ay, may final speech pala.
So I have the pleasure of calling on stage Assistant Secretary Alan Hepty, one of my favorite colleagues in DTI, to deliver the closing remarks. But before that, I really would like to remind you again to please fill out all those evaluation forms. So Alan.
Thank you, Anne. I know that this is the most awaited part of this forum, the closing remarks. So I have prepared closing remarks, but again, my apologies. I will not read that anymore. I'll go straight to the point. First is that on behalf of the Department of Trade and Industry, particularly the Bureau of International Trade Relations, I would like to extend our utmost gratitude to our speakers from, of course, other countries, the United States, China, and also from the private sector and the government sectors who share their insights, also concerns with respect to our task to craft trade policies as we forge relationship with our trading partners. They are really valuable, they have been properly documented, and we are looking forward to engage with them more in this kind of exercise. And of course, I would like also to thank our attendees and the other participants, especially those who remain here up to the last part of this program. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. I would like to, I would like also to extend a special thanks to those attendees who propounded questions which are very important, at least in steering the discussions during the panel discussion. Also to our moderator, Ed, maraming salamat for coming here. I know the role of it has been a diverse topic. Isip ko kasi traffic eh. It has been a diverse topic because when you talk about international trade, as I've been repeatedly mentioning, we're not just talking about goods. It actually covers everything. The whole gamut of running the government, running the country. And of course, we need someone to in a way integrate all of them and of course direct the discussions, especially during the sessions. And also, I'd like to thank Ambassador Basilio for summarizing what our speakers and have contributed in this forum. It was indeed an excellent one. At least, hindi na mahihirapan yung aming mga rapporteur in preparing the report. And of course, ang pinaka-importante is the Bureau of International Trade Relations. So, hindi ko lang kayo i-say but I just want to emphasize the fact that in the preparation of this event, I would say that the period for preparation was a short one. Okay, it was a plan. This is the first time I think that we have done such big event under the OCO program. But I will have to admire my colleagues at BITR, not only the efforts, energy, and time that they have spent, because to the details they have prepared the same. I have witnessed how they prepared it. It is not just about venue and dates, but of course, sabi ko nga, up to the minute details of the preparation, okay? They have been very important. Dahil sabi ko nga, may karera sila after BITR, pwede sila maging event organizer. So again, maraming salamat sa inyo lahat. Again, malakas na palakpakan ng aming mga tuloy sa BITR.
Okay, so I have the honor of formally closing the OCO Forum in International Trade. Thank you very much for actively participating, and we hope to see you again in the next OCO Forum. Good afternoon, and hope you don't get caught in the traffic.